First Contact and Challenge. The Mariax warship emerged from hyperspace with the grace of a predator, its crystalline hull refracting Earth's sunlight in patterns that made human satellites' tracking systems stutter. Admiral Krenthar stood on the bridge, his iridescent scales shifting from deep blue to purple as he observed the primitive planet below. His species had dominated 3 galactic arms through superior evolution. Their crystalline-based biology made them virtually indestructible, or so they believed. Fascinating, he rumbled, multiple eyes blinking in sequence as Earth's atmospheric readings scrolled across his neural interface. These humans survive in this pressure cooker of a planet, yet they've barely reached their lunar satellite. His second in command, Commander Vexra, flicked her sensory tendrils in agreement. The Council considers them a curiosity, Admiral. They've rejected membership in the Galactic Confederation 3 times, claiming they're not ready. Their military capabilities are modest at best. Then they should welcome our challenge. Krenthar's mouthplates clicked in what passed for a smile among his kind. Send the transmission. The message was broadcast globally in all human languages. The Mariax Empire's elite warriors challenged Earth's finest to complete their legendary crystalline trials, a combat assessment that had broken the strongest species in the galaxy. Victory would mean automatic acceptance into the Galactic Confederation with full technological benefits. Failure would require Earth to submit to Mariax protection and guidance. The response came not from any world government, but from a single facility in the mountains of what humans called Colorado. The transmission showed a human female, her dark skin weathered by sun and wind, standing in what appeared to be a training ground carved into the mountainside. Greetings, Admiral Krenthar. I'm Colonel Sarah Chen, Commanding Officer of the Earth Special Forces Joint Training Command. We've received your challenge, and we have a counter-proposal. She paused, her brown eyes somehow managing to meet his gaze through the video feed. Instead of your crystalline trials, we invite your best warriors to complete our basic Special Forces qualification course. Same terms. Laughter rippled across the bridge, the crystalline beings' bodies chiming like wind bells. They're Special Forces. Vexra chimed in amusement. Our warriors emerge from their growth chambers with more combat capability than their entire species. But Krenthar studied the human's expression carefully. In his 1,000 years of military service, he had learned that species who survived on high-gravity death worlds rarely lacked confidence without reason. Still, their superiority was undeniable. Accept, he ordered. Select our 12 finest initiates. 72 hours later, Krenthar watched his chosen warriors descend to the training facility. They were perfect specimens, each standing 3 meters tall, their crystalline bodies engineered for combat in environments that would kill most species instantly. Their leader, Initiate Prime Zarkax, had personally conquered a minor spacefaring civilization. Colonel Chen met them at the landing pad, looking absurdly small next to the towering aliens. Other humans in various combat uniforms stood nearby, their expressions professionally neutral. The mountain air was thin, but the Mariax barely noticed. Their bodies automatically adjusted to any atmosphere. Welcome to Camp Prometheus, Chen said, her voice carrying despite her size. Your trial begins at dawn. I suggest you use the next 12 hours to acclimate to Earth's gravity. Zarkax's crystals chimed in amusement. Our bodies adapt instantly, Colonel. Perhaps we should begin now. Chen's smile didn't reach her eyes. Dawn. Initiate Prime. That's your first lesson in human warfare. We fight on our terms, our timeline. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and we've prepared electromagnetic damping fields around the facility. Your neural enhancements and automatic adaptation systems won't function here. You'll experience Earth as we do. The amusement died in the crystalline chimes. Without their tech, they would feel every gram of Earth's crushing gravity, every molecule of its dense atmosphere. But they were still physically superior, weren't they? That night, as Earth's gravity pulled at their crystalline forms with unexpected force, the Mariax warriors lay in their reinforced bunks, listening to the strange sounds of Earth's night. In the distance, human recruits were running their night drills, their voices carrying cadence calls across the thin mountain air. The sounds were alien, primitive, and somehow unsettling. Zarkax found himself studying the facility's layout through their barracks window. The obstacle courses seemed simple enough. Walls to climb, ropes to traverse, weights to carry. But something about the casual confidence of their human hosts nagged at his tactical mind. These humans, these soft, short-lived beings, had survived on a planet that would crush most species. They had fought their way up the evolutionary ladder against predators that would give even Mariax pause. "They're testing us," he finally said to his team. "Not our strength or our speed, but something else." His crystalline form hummed with uncertainty, a sensation none of them had experienced since emerging from their growth chambers. In the pre-dawn hours, as the temperature dropped well below what their bodies were designed to handle without tech assistance, they heard the first human recruits beginning their day. The sounds of boots on gravel, of equipment being readied, of voices sharp with purpose rather than their usual crystalline precision, filled the air. Colonel Chen's voice came over the facility's speakers at exactly 500 local time. "Attention Mariax warriors. Your trial begins in 1 hour. Remember, you're not here to prove you're stronger or faster. You're here to prove you can finish what humans do every day. Welcome to Earth, gentlemen. Try to keep up." The words sent an unfamiliar sensation through their crystalline forms, something their species hadn't felt in 10,000 years of engineered perfection. Doubt. Dawn broke over the Rockies like a hammer of light, revealing a training ground that seemed to have been designed by someone with a grudge against the laws of physics. And as the Mariax warriors took their places at the starting line, they realized that the humans weren't just watching. They were participating, fully equipped for what they called just another day at the office. The first test awaited, and for the first time in their perfect existence, the Mariax weren't certain of victory. Earth's gravity pulled at them like an ancient god's fist, and somewhere in the thin mountain air, they could have sworn they heard the planet itself laughing. Breaking point. The first crack appeared in Zarkax's crystalline arm during hour 3 of what the humans casually called morning PT. It was microscopic, barely visible even to his enhanced vision, but its implications shattered his confidence more thoroughly than any physical blow. Again. Sergeant Rivera's voice cut through the thin mountain air. The human instructor stood perfectly steady despite having completed the same exercises alongside them, his dark eyes studying each Mariax warrior with unsettling intensity. 50 more burpees. Move like you mean it. The exercise seemed designed specifically to exploit their crystalline biology's weaknesses. Drop to the ground, Earth's merciless gravity pulling at their dense forms. Push up, joints straining against pressure they'd never been designed to handle. Jump, each landing sending shockwaves through their increasingly stressed crystalline structure. Repeat. 3 of the 12 Mariax had already withdrawn, their perfect forms showing spiderweb patterns of stress fractures. Without their neural enhancements and adaptation systems, every movement was a battle against this planet's raw physical laws. Having trouble breathing, big guy? Rivera asked Zarkax, not unkindly. That's the altitude. Welcome to 14,000 feet. We're just getting started. The next phase involved a ruck march. A simple walk, the humans claimed, carrying weighted packs up a mountain trail. Simple, except Earth's gravity transformed each step into a test of will. The Mariax, used to moving with crystalline grace, found themselves stumbling on loose rocks, their perfect balance betrayed by exhaustion they'd never experienced before. "You know what's interesting about your species?" Colonel Chen had fallen in step beside Zarkax, her own heavy pack seemingly forgotten as she maintained a steady pace. "You evolved for perfection. Humans, we evolved for adaptation. Every step you take is a fight against this environment. Every step we take is a conversation with it." Zarkax wanted to respond with something appropriately proud, but his crystalline vocal structures were too busy trying to process the thin air. Ahead of him, another Mariax warrior sat down heavily, fine cracks visible across his torso. 7 remained. The trail led them higher, where snow dusted the ground, and the air grew even thinner. The humans had warned them about hypothermia, another concept foreign to beings who had always relied on technology to regulate their temperature. Now, as their core temperature dropped, their crystalline forms became more brittle, more vulnerable. The thing about human training, Colonel Chen continued, her breath visible in the cold air, is that it's not about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about continuing when your body says stop, when your mind says stop, when everything in you says stop. They reached a plateau where other human trainees were already set up for the next evolution. The sight of the obstacle course drew a crystalline groan from the remaining Mariacs. Ropes, walls, and mud pits stretched across the mountainside, each station a fresh challenge to their failing strength. "You're designed for perfection," Chen observed as they watched a human trainee faceplant in the mud, laugh, and keep going. "We're designed for failure. We fail every day. We fail in training so we won't fail in combat. But more importantly, we get back up. Every single time." The mud pit proved nearly catastrophic. The cold slurry worked its way into their crystalline matrices, freezing in hairline fractures and expanding. 2 more Mariacs withdrew, their once perfect forms now resembling cracked glass. 5 remained, their pride the only thing stronger than their pain. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the training ground, Zarkax found himself struggling with a simple rope climb. His crystalline muscles, capable of crushing titanium in normal circumstances, trembled with fatigue. Above him, a human recruit, he thought her name was Martinez, descended the adjacent rope with smooth efficiency. "Hey," she called over, hanging easily from her rope. "Want to know the secret?" She waited until his multiple eyes focused on her. "Stop trying to power through it. Work with the gravity, not against it. Like dancing with a partner who's trying to kill you." The analogy was so uniquely human that Zarkax would have laughed if he'd had the energy. But as he adjusted his approach, incorporating her advice, he found himself making progress. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't perfect, but it worked. Night brought new challenges. The temperature dropped further, and the humans introduced them to something they called Fire Watch, taking turns staying awake to maintain security and tend to basic tasks. It seemed inefficient, primitive even, until Zarkax realized its true purpose during his shift. Standing in the dark, fighting exhaustion, he watched the camp's rhythms. Human trainees moving through their own exercises, instructors preparing for the next day's evolutions, the quiet efficiency of a machine built not for perfection, but for relentless forward progress. Starting to get it, Colonel Chen appeared beside him, offering a steaming cup of what humans called coffee, a stimulant they seemed to regard as essential as oxygen. "We're not trying to break you. We're showing you why we survive." Zarkax studied his reflection in the coffee's surface, noting the network of tiny stress fractures that now decorated his once flawless form. "We thought ourselves invincible," he admitted. "Superior." "That's not why you're failing," Chen replied. "You're failing because you've never had to face real adversity. Perfection is fragile. Adaptation is resilient. Tomorrow's going to be worse, by the way." She left him with that thought as false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled through the mountains, a storm approaching. Zarkax felt more cracks forming just from the temperature change, but for the first time in his existence, imperfection didn't seem like failure. The remaining 5 Mariax warriors watched the sunrise, their crystalline forms catching the light like broken prisms. They had already lasted longer than any other species attempting human special forces training. It wasn't the victory they'd expected, but as they prepared for another day of what humans called embracing the suck, they began to understand that lasting was its own kind of triumph. The storm that hit Camp Prometheus wasn't just weather. It was Earth showing the Myriacs exactly why humans classified their own planet as a death world. The temperature plummeted 30 degrees in minutes, visibility dropped to zero, and wind-driven ice particles became microscopic projectiles that found every crack in the aliens' crystalline forms. Survival phase begins now. Colonel Chen's voice barely carried over the howling wind. Welcome to a Category 3 blizzard, gentlemen. Time to test your adaptation skills. The 5 remaining Myriacs warriors found themselves split into mixed teams with human trainees. Zarkax was paired with Martinez and 2 other humans he knew only as Jackson and Pottle. Their objective seemed suicidally simple: navigate 10 miles through the storm to a designated shelter point, carrying essential supplies. This is madness. Zarkax's crystalline voice chimed with strain as they fought through snowdrifts taller than the humans. No sentient species would willingly train in these conditions. Martinez, leading their group with a compass and topographical map, just laughed. You should see the winter course in Alaska. This is practically a beach day. Her voice was light, but her eyes remained focused, constantly scanning their surroundings. The first real crisis hit 2 miles in. Jackson slipped on an ice-covered rock, his leg twisting at an angle that made even the Myriacs wince. But instead of calling for evacuation, the human simply redistributed his pack's weight and formed a support system that allowed him to continue. Why don't you leave him? Zarkax asked, genuinely puzzled. He's compromised the team's efficiency. Patel, a quiet woman with steady hands who'd been monitoring Jackson's injury, looked up sharply. That's not how humans work. We adapt, we overcome, and we never leave anyone behind. The lesson hit harder than the wind. Myriacs warriors were expected to be perfect or be replaced. The concept of adaptation, of working around limitations rather than discarding them, was alien to their philosophy. Hour 3 brought them to a sheer rock face, now coated in ice. The humans' planned route had been cut off by avalanche risk, forcing a choice between a 6-mile detour or a direct climb. Time and temperature were becoming critical factors. We climb, Martins decided, already unpacking ropes and anchors. Zarkax, your crystalline structure might actually help here. Those stress fractures will give you better grip on the ice. She was right. The very imperfections that had been causing him shame became advantages. His cracked crystalline fingers found purchase where smooth ones would have slipped. The humans taught him to use his weight with the rope rather than against it. Another lesson in working with Earth's harsh conditions rather than trying to overpower them. Halfway up, disaster struck another Myriacs team within sight of their position. One of the warriors, his crystalline form too brittle from cold, shattered an arm while placing an anchor. The sounds of crystalline fracture carried across the storm. Without hesitation, Martinez and Jackson set up a rescue line. Zarkax, we need your strength here, Patel called out. Can you hold both lines while we get them across to our route? The old Zarkax would have calculated the risk, determined it was tactically unsound. The Zarkax, who had spent not even 2 full days training with humans, simply anchored himself and said, "Do it." For 20 harrowing minutes, they suspended operations to bring the injured Myriacs and his team across to their more stable position. The humans worked with practiced efficiency, using climbing gear in ways it was never designed for, turning a potential tragedy into a difficult but manageable situation. Why? The injured Myriacs asked, as they splinted his shattered arm with supplies from their limited medical kit. Why risk yourselves? Because that's what we do, Jackson replied through gritted teeth, his own injured leg forgotten in the effort to help another. Humans don't beat nature by being stronger. We beat it by being stubborn and working together. The storm intensified as night began to fall. Temperature dropped to levels that had the Myriacs' crystalline structures creaking with every movement. Yet the humans pressed on, navigating by compass and starlight when visible, by pure stubbornness when not. They found the other teams at the shelter point just as the worst of the storm hit. 3 more Myriacs had been forced to withdraw due to structural damage, leaving only 3 still in the training. Zarkax was shocked to realize he was one of them. Inside the shelter, a Spartan mountain cabin with basic supplies, the humans immediately set about establishing what they called Tactical Operations Center. Teams organized water, food, medical care, and watch rotations without needing orders. It was chaos and efficiency intertwined in a way that defied the Mariak's concept of military precision. "You're wondering how we do it," Colonel Chen said, appearing beside Zarkax as he watched the humans work. "How we function without perfect order, without flawless execution. Among other things," he admitted, studying the hairline fractures that now covered his entire form. "We were engineered to be perfect warriors, yet here we are, being outdone by beings who seem to succeed because of their imperfections, not despite them." Chen smiled, the expression visible even in the shelter's dim light. "Perfection is a destination. Adaptation is a journey. Guess which one serves you better when everything goes wrong." The storm raged through the night, testing the shelter's integrity and the occupants' resolve. Humans and Mariaks worked together, each learning from the other. The aliens discovering the power of flexibility, the humans benefiting from the Mariaks' remaining enhanced capabilities. As false dawn once again approached, Zarkax found himself on watch with Martinez. "The storm is getting worse," he observed, his sensors, what remained of them, detecting another pressure drop. "Yeah," she grinned, checking her equipment with practiced ease. "That means tomorrow's going to be really interesting." The way she said it, as if the prospect of even greater challenges was something to look forward to, made Zarkax realize that perhaps the humans had been right to reject Confederation membership. They weren't ready, not because they were primitive, but because they were beyond anything the galaxy had expected them to be. Mind over matter. Dawn never truly came on the fourth day of training. The storm had merged with a larger weather system, creating what the humans casually termed a proper mess. Inside the shelter, Colonel Chen gathered the remaining trainees, 3 Mariaks and 20 humans, for briefing. "Today's evolution will test something our Mariaks friends haven't encountered before," she announced, her eyes scanning the room. "We're not testing your strength, speed, or even your adaptability. Today, we test your will." Zarkax observed the humans' reactions. Where his people would have demanded specifics, strategic objectives, the humans simply nodded, checking their gear with practiced motions. They'd learned to expect the unexpected. "The next phase starts in 1 hour," Chen continued. "No special equipment, no technological aids. Just you, your mind, and the mountain. Dress warm." The task, when revealed, seemed deceptively simple. Stand in the snow, at attention, indefinitely. No movement allowed except for safety adjustments. No conversation, no distraction. Just mind against matter. "This is psychological warfare," one of the remaining Mariaks, Valtex, muttered as they took their positions in the howling wind. "They mean to break us through inaction rather than action." Martinez, standing next to Zarkax, overheard and smiled. "Not breaking. Building. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't doing something, it's doing nothing." Hours passed. The cold found every crack in the Mariax's crystalline forms. Every imperfection became a point of focused agony. Their species had evolved for action, for perfect motion. Stillness was anathema. 4 hours in, Valtex's crystalline form began to resonate with stress. The vibrations started small, but grew until they threatened structural integrity. "I cannot," he announced, his voice thick with shame. "This serves no tactical purpose. I withdraw." 2 Mariaks remained. The humans hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. Their breath frosted in the air, their faces reddened by cold, but their eyes remained focused on some distant point only they could see. 6 hours. Zarkax felt his mind beginning to fragment like his crystalline shell. The universe had contracted to an infinite moment of cold and stillness. Beside him, humans showed signs of strain. Minute tremors, frost-nipped extremities. But they endured. How? He finally asked Martinez, his voice barely a whisper, "How do you stand this meaningless suffering?" "Not meaningless," she replied, her eyes still fixed ahead. "This is where you learn who you are when everything else is stripped away. When there's nothing left but the voice in your head saying, 'Quit.'" 8 hours. The second to last Mariax, a warrior named Krelvor, who had once held off an entire planetary invasion force, began to crack. Literally and figuratively. "There is no victory here," he declared. "No glory. No purpose." "The purpose," Jackson called out, breaking silence for the first time in hours, "is to find your limit, and then push past it." Krelvor stood for another 30 minutes before withdrawing, his crystalline form webbed with stress fractures. Zarkax remained, the last of his kind in the trial. 10 hours. Darkness fell again, but the exercise continued. The humans had positioned lights around the formation, harsh LEDs that cast everything in stark relief. Zarkax watched his own shadow, noticing how the cracks and imperfections in his form created patterns he'd never seen before. "Your body is screaming at you to move," Chen's voice carried across the formation. "Your mind is presenting logical arguments for why this is pointless. The cold is telling you that one step, just one step, would bring relief. This is where you learn that all of those voices lie." 12 hours. Zarkax had entered a state his species had never experienced. His perfect crystalline mind, designed for tactical clarity and strategic brilliance, had gone quiet. In that silence, he found something new, not perfection, but persistence. "The difference," Martinez said softly, as if reading his thoughts, "between those who make it and those who don't isn't strength or skill. It's the ability to keep going when every reason to continue has been replaced by every reason to stop." 14 hours. The storm began to clear, revealing a sky full of stars. Zarkax found himself studying them, not as navigation points or tactical references, but as humans might. Points of light in an infinite darkness, each one a reminder that persistence could outlast any trial. "You're not standing here because you have to," Chen addressed the formation. "You're standing here because you chose to. And you continue to choose it with every passing second. That's what makes this meaningful." 16 hours. Dawn approached again, painting the snow-covered mountains in colors Zarkax had never truly appreciated before. His crystalline form was now a network of cracks and fractures, each one a record of what he'd endured. "When does it end?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. Patel, who hadn't spoken since the exercise began, replied with what might have been a smile in her voice. "It ends when you realize it never really ends. This is what we are. This is what we do. We endure." 18 hours. Chen called a halt. Of the 20 humans who started, 15 remained standing. And one Mariax, his once perfect form now permanently altered by Earth's challenges. As they were finally allowed to move, to seek warmth and rest, Chen approached Zarkax. "You understand now, don't you, why we rejected Confederation membership?" Zarkax looked at his hands, at the fracture patterns that would never heal to their original perfection. "You weren't ready," he said slowly, "because you're beyond ready. The galaxy isn't prepared for what humanity truly is." Chen nodded. "Tomorrow's the final test. Get some rest. You'll need it." But as Zarkax followed the humans back to shelter, he realized that something fundamental had changed. He no longer feared failure or imperfection. He had found something far more valuable, the unbreakable human spirit that had somehow transferred itself to his crystalline soul. Humility and honor. The final day of training dawned clear and cold, the storm having swept away to reveal a transformed landscape. Looking out from Camp Prometheus's highest point, Zarkax barely recognized himself in the reflection of the morning sun. His crystalline form, once flawless, now told a story in its fracture patterns, each crack a lesson, each imperfection a badge of honor. "Beautiful morning for a graduation exercise," Colonel Chen announced, gathering the remaining trainees. The humans looked exhausted but alert, their eyes carrying the quiet confidence of those who had already proven themselves against their own limitations. Today's evolution is simple. Make it home. The task seemed straightforward enough until Chen outlined the details. 20 miles through mountain terrain, carrying full gear, with 3 objectives to secure along the way. Teams would be mixed, humans and the lone remaining Mariacs working together one final time. Remember, Chen added, her gaze lingering on Zarkax, the mission isn't over until everyone crosses the finish line. Together. As they prepared to move out, Zarkax found himself approached by Admiral Krenthar, who had descended from the orbiting warship to observe the final phase. The Admiral's perfect crystalline form now seemed somehow less impressive than the battle-worn humans around them. "You've changed. Initiate Prime," Krenthar observed, multiple eyes studying the fracture patterns that mapped Zarkax's trials. "Yes, Admiral," Zarkax replied, checking his gear as Martinez had taught him. "I've been improved." The first objective was a simulated rescue operation in a narrow canyon. In the old days, Zarkax would have calculated the most efficient solution, likely sacrificing resources for speed. Now, he found himself working in seamless coordination with his human teammates, combining their adaptability with his remaining enhanced capabilities. "You know," Martins commented as they rigged a pulley system to evacuate a dummy casualty. 6 days ago, you would have just jumped down there and tried to power through it." Zarkax helped anchor the rope, his crystalline fingers finding purchase in ways that complemented the human's techniques. 6 days ago, I was perfect," he replied. "Now I am strong." The second objective tested their tactical decision-making under pressure. A simulated enemy force had taken position between them and their extraction point. The old Mariax doctrine would have called for overwhelming force. Instead, Zarkax found himself suggesting alternatives that would have once seemed beneath his species' dignity. "Flanking movement through the river," he proposed, pointing out the route. "The water will mask our thermal signatures, and the morning mist provides cover." Jackson grinned. "Look at you, thinking like a sneaky human instead of a crystal warrior." "Sometimes," Zarkax responded, remembering Chen's words, "the best solution isn't the most perfect one." As they approached the final objective, exhaustion began to take its toll. The humans were pushing their physical limits, and Zarkax's crystalline form had developed new stress patterns. But something had changed in how they faced their fatigue. Where once he would have seen weakness in their struggle, now he recognized the quiet strength in their persistence. The last task was, fittingly, a test of trust. A ravine crossed by a single cable, requiring teams to support each other across. The humans, despite their exhaustion, organized themselves with practiced efficiency. Zarkax found himself integrated into their system naturally, his altered form working in harmony with their methods. "I understand now," he said to Chen as they neared the finish point, the sun setting behind them. "Why Earth produces such formidable warriors." Chen raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "You don't train them to be perfect. You train them to be unbreakable." The final mile brought them back to Camp Prometheus. Admiral Krenthar waited at the finish line with other officials from both species. As the mixed team crossed together, Zarkax noticed something he'd missed before: the way the humans moved as one unit despite their individual exhaustion, the way they supported each other without hesitation. "The Mariax Empire," Admiral Krenthar announced formally, "acknowledges the completion of this trial. As per our agreement." "If I may, Admiral," Zarkax interrupted, "an action unthinkable just days ago. I don't believe we truly understood the terms of this challenge." The Admiral's crystalline form shifted in surprise. "Explain." "We offered Earth membership in the Confederation based on our standards of perfection," Zarkax continued, standing straighter despite his fatigue. "But Earth's strength isn't in meeting our standards. It's in surpassing them in ways we never imagined." He gestured to his transformed crystalline body. "Look at me, Admiral." By our measures, I am now flawed, imperfect. By human standards, I am stronger than I have ever been. Perhaps it is not Earth that needs to prove itself to the Confederation, but the Confederation that needs to prove itself worthy of Earth. A long silence followed, broken only by the mountain wind. Finally, Colonel Chen stepped forward. The Earth Special Forces Command extends an open invitation to the Mariax Empire, she announced. Send your warriors not to prove themselves, but to learn. Not to demonstrate perfection, but to discover something better. Admiral Krenthar studied the assembled humans and his transformed warrior. His perfect crystalline form caught the light, but somehow seemed less impressive next to their battle-worn appearances. The Mariax Empire accepts, he declared, not as teachers, but as students. As the formal proceedings concluded, Martinez approached Zarkax. So, think you'll be back for the advanced course? Zarkax examined his reflection one last time, seeing not the flaws in his crystalline surface, but the story they told. Yes, he replied. After all, humans have taught me that the greatest strength lies not in being unbreakable, but in how you piece yourself back together after breaking. The sun set over Camp Prometheus, casting long shadows across the training ground where perfection had given way to something far more valuable, the unbreakable spirit of adaptation, persistence, and growth. In the gathering darkness, the fracture patterns in Zarkax's crystalline form caught the last rays of light, turning his imperfections into something beautiful, a testament to the lesson humanity had taught him and his species. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't in maintaining perfection, but in discovering that imperfection, properly understood, is perfection of a different kind.